43% of adults with mental health conditions receive mental health services in the United States. Studies have shown that people of color access care at a much lower rate due to a range of factors, including financial and physical access, stigma, lack of cultural competence in therapists, and cultural attitudes. Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Regeter, and today I'm joined by social worker and therapist, Sam McDaniels. Explore mental health within BIPOC communities as we tackle the stigma surrounding it and delve into the importance of setting realistic boundaries while considering cultural and contextual variations.
Tom, thank you so much for joining me today. I am really excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I really just want to check in with you. How are you really?
That's a really great question. I'm studying for my social work exam, which is at the end of the month. So I've been a little bit stressed with that, like honestly pretty stressed about that. I don't do well test taking, so I'm breathing through it I'm doing my meditations to help me breathe through exams. Um, but that's coming up. I have this today. I have another speaking arrangement at the end of the month, and I have to do all of these things. So I think I'm just honestly very stressed and trying to manage all of it. But how are you doing?
First of all, that's a lot going on. And I know with me, test anxiety is a really big thing. I had an exam last night and
Yeah.
it's just a lot of, I know for me, it's like this fear of like failing. And I'm
Yeah.
always so convinced that I'm gonna fail. And I think I got like one question wrong last night, so I did not end up failing. However, all the way up until like an hour after the exam, I was convinced I failed out of school and that my life was over. So I feel that stress of exams, except yours is way bigger. So good luck on that. I'm excited for you and I know you're gonna do
Thank
great.
you. I'll let
Um,
you know. I was gonna say if I pass, but I'm sure I'm gonna pass.
you're gonna pass. Don't
Yes,
even say if, you will pass.
I'm gonna. Thank you.
I believe in you. For me, I've had so much going on and really stressed traveling back and forth for school. I
Right.
travel across the country to go to school because my grandma's Alzheimer's. I spend half my week with her,
Right.
half my week in California. And with all the plane rides, I haven't been sleeping well, starting to get a bit sick, and just you can hear it in my voice a bit. So just trying to get through this semester is kind of where
Yeah.
I'm at. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's October. You got a little bit left, but there are
almost
holidays
there.
coming up. We're just push for the holidays. Do you get fall break or anything?
No. Well, we get like the winter break, like the 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I'm just really excited for that. I think we have like 3 days for Thanksgiving, which is a great time for me to get some sleep, although I'll be
Yeah.
studying for finals, so I doubt I'll sleep.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
end of December, I'm gonna sleep. So excited. I think like December
I'm
15th.
excited for you. Yes. Sweet dreams early on.
So excited. But I'm really excited for our conversation because being a student in psychology, you being a social worker about to take your test, it's really important that we have conversations on that lack of access, that stigma, the barriers to treatment, and that is so prevalent in the BIPOC community. So I'm really excited for our conversation and to get to learn more about where the stigma is, what the treatment and accessibility is, and how all of us as a society can learn to overcome this.
Yeah, I think it's a definitely an important conversation because it's hard to understand people if you don't know where they're coming from. So you have to know like their background history, their trauma, so that you can fit that into what you've learned. So it's like bringing everything together, what I've learned, and then also like with the person and what their needs are, and like balancing all of that together.
It's so important. And I was so grateful that my school offered a multicultural counseling class because it really gave a unique insight. I mean, I grew up in a community that everyone was very much like me. So it wasn't until I was 20 that I realized not everybody could access like health treatments, couldn't access doctors and medical care. care. And that blew my mind because it's something I was never exposed to, and I don't know why I wasn't exposed to it. And so I was really grateful to have a class that focused in on the different stigmas that can exist, why so many people don't get as much therapy. I mean, within the Black community, a lot less likely to access mental health services, less likely to seek treatment, more likely to have low quality care due to lack of cultural competency. So it's a really important conversation to be held.
So I think that part of the stigma comes from thinking about our generational trauma. And then this isn't just for like Black people, but for all people in the BIPOC community, there's been some sort of generational racial trauma that we've kind of had to endure, but with almost a happy face or with an okay face. So I think a lot of us have learned that we suffer, but we suffered through it in silence, and that was considered strength for a lot of us. So a lot of our parents, our grandparents are like, yeah, you know, when I was a kid, I went through all these things and I didn't cry one time. And for them, that's a way that they can say that, yeah, I was strong, I was brave. But us growing up in our time now, it's like, yeah, you did have to do that. And we also don't want to keep doing that. And so a lot of people now are like, I'm going to go get therapy. I'm going to go try out something that will help me. And I think a lot of people consider that, who are on the other side, who used to think that was strength, consider it weakness to go to therapy. So now people are like, well, am I weak to go to therapy? Is there something wrong with me? And that is what kind of gets in our heads in terms of like, do I belong there? What will happen if I go there? And it can feel a little scary.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's honestly blows my mind that people think going to therapy is a weakness, that we've created such a misunderstanding of therapy, of mental health, that people genuinely are afraid to get the help that they need. I mean, if I broke my arm, I wouldn't walk around and be like, oh, I can't go to orthopedic. I would go to orthopedic. I wouldn't just suffer in silence. And no one would judge me for it. But when it comes to mental health, for some reason, we have this fear of going to someone to help us. And that makes it, the symptoms just get worse. And without that treatment, without that support, you're not living the quality of life that you deserve. And that's not fair.
It's totally not fair. You're not living the quality of life that you deserve. And you're almost not even aware that there is another quality of life that's possible, that like you can feel better than how you're feeling right now. And I think that another part of it is, and especially in the Black community, we've kind of grew up on the church. Like, you're just going to go and you're going to pray about it. It's going to be fine. And if you pray about it and it doesn't happen for you, well, then some people will say, oh, you know, you just have to pray harder. Maybe God isn't giving you what you want. And it becomes such an internalized thing of like, what am I doing wrong that I can't help myself? And you're not doing anything wrong. You just don't have a degree in mental health. And that's why you come to us, so that we can help you parse through the things, and so it doesn't have to hurt as badly.
That faith-based component can be very helpful and very detrimental. I know for me, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I went to private Catholic school my whole life. And that's one thing you're taught, right? To just pray. If you pray, then you won't have any anxiety. You won't have any depression. And I know just for me personally, when it didn't work, I was like, okay, something's wrong with me. Nothing is going to help me. And I have to suffer in silence to be quiet about it, because people can't know that God's not on my side, or whatever it was that I was creating in my head.
That's definitely a big part of it, that they believe, like people in church will say, there's something wrong with you, that you're not getting what you need from God. And that makes people, one, feel fearful of God, but also continue to be fearful of themselves, and continue to be fearful of what it would be like to like go talk to somebody through that, because that's what they consider to be bad and wrong. So it's on the list of things that are so terrible, and it definitely shouldn't be. It should be okay to be like, I'm feeling things, and that this is hard for me. So I'm definitely glad that we're having this conversation, so like anybody that's listening doesn't have to feel that shame, and normalize it. As your podcast says, it's totally okay for you to go to therapy. You should go to therapy. That's where you feel better. It's like our going to the doctor, but for our mental health.
Absolutely. Therapy can be so beneficial, but it's so important to find a therapist that's right for you, because of that lack of cultural competency, that there was not necessarily a lot of education in many programs. A lot of people are mean. A lot of people are ignorant. A lot of people don't care. A lot of people don't want to understand. A lot of people don't want to educate themselves, or just have not educated themselves. And it can be very detrimental if you go to a therapist that isn't right for you. So do you have any advice on questions you can ask a therapist, the ways you can find a therapist that is right for you?
Yeah. So in terms of questions, I always would want to know, like, first I want to make sure my therapist is being cared for. Like, how is your self-care? How are you, like, you want to make sure that that person is taking care of themselves so that they can accurately take care of you. I would want to know, like, where you went to school. I want to know what types of classes that you took. I want to know your areas of focus, or like, can you, I basically am getting at, can you actually help me? Is there something that you have studied that will be helpful for me? And if not, then maybe that's when I'm going to go to somebody else. You also want to see, like, how is the vibe with the person? So maybe you're on the phone with them and it just feels very like rigid or something that you're not wanting to sign up for. Call another therapist. Like, you can do, most consultation calls are free. So you can talk to somebody for like 15 minutes, find out what their background is, their area of study and focus, and then you can go from there. But I think it's also about like energy and who you think you're more likely to be comfortable with.
It's
And I think for a
so
lot of BIPOC people, a lot of us feel comfortable with people who look like us. And that is also one of the barriers to treatment, because there are so many people that need help, but there aren't enough of us that are BIPOC and also in those spaces to be able to receive them.
absolutely. And it's frustrating when it's so hard to find a therapist that you can identify with. And I think that a lot of people also don't know that they can ask questions to their therapist. I know it's something that I learned very recently, is that you can do a consultation. I didn't know that was a thing. I thought I had to set up an
Right.
appointment and pay X amount of dollars to even meet the therapist, but that's not true. Consultation calls exist and you can ask them questions. I always thought a therapist is interviewing you as a potential client, but you can interview them back to make sure they're right for you. And if they're not, it's okay to say, thank you, I appreciate you taking the time. I don't think this is the right fit for me. And then you don't have to continue with that therapist, even if you start a few sessions and realize, you know what, they're not the right fit. You are allowed to draw that boundary, draw that line, and search for someone who is right for you.
Right. And I think that I wonder if some people feel nervous about doing that consultation call, because for them, maybe it means I have to sign up with this person after I talk to them. But if you don't feel right with them, you don't have to. And also, on the other end, the therapist doesn't feel bad if you tell them, no, we're not a good match. It's just like, okay, that's good to know. And so I wish you the best, and I hope you find what you're looking for. And that's really all that it is. So I know a lot of people feel like there's some sort of obligation. They don't want to hurt the therapist feeling, but also it's really about you and like how you're feeling, and it's not about the therapist. And the therapist is going to be okay if you tell them no. So
Yeah.
for all the anxious people out there, it's okay to tell us no.
One of the big misconceptions that come with therapy is this idea that it's like a money-making scheme and they just want to take your money. But I can say as a student, that's not what we're taught.
No.
We're taught that we want to help you with coming into this field because we want to help you. And if we're not the right fit, maybe we can offer you a referral. That's something too you can ask, say, you know what, thank you so much for taking this call with me. I'm not sure you're the right person. I'm actually looking for someone who specializes in this. Would you be able to offer me a referral? Most therapists do have a network. I mean, we all go to school with other people. We may
Right.
be able to help you find someone that's right for you. And I think a therapist who was properly trained and does take care of themselves, maybe goes to therapy and gets the support they
Right.
need, won't feel rejected and hurt by you wanting to find someone that's right for you.
It's honestly just part of our regular day. We have people who we have consultation calls with. They tell us no. We have clients that we've worked with for a while who say, I don't think I need therapy anymore, but thank you for your help. We get broken up with, and it's okay. We are fine, and don't worry about ever hurting our feelings, because it's just part of our regular job. Yeah.
Exactly. And on the note of being able to end that therapeutic relationship, what are maybe some red flags that people can look out for to say, you know what, this therapist may not have what I need?
Well, I think it's about, like, if you are struggling with something that they have no experience in, then they're probably not a good fit for you. Like, for example, if you're wanting to work with somebody who has like a lot of background in working with people who have substance issues, and that person has no experience ever working with anybody with substance issues, has not taken any trainings, no classes or anything like that, they might be able to help you, but it might not be as good of a help as somebody that like specifically works with people with substance issues. So you want to be able to be in a place where you're being helped to the best that you can. And sometimes that might mean going to a person who specializes in something very specific. So you want to ask the questions like, what have you done that to work in this area? Have you had clients that have struggled in similar ways? And if they haven't, that is okay. That just might not be the person that you want to stay with.
Absolutely. And I think there's also that piece of understanding the difference between I am explaining my experience and I'm now educating you and where that line is.
And I even to go back to the BIPOC side, I think that for a lot of BIPOC people, part of why they struggle to find therapists, there are a lot of great white therapists, but they maybe feel worried about, will that person understand me? Will they know where I'm coming from? They don't want to have to educate the person. And so for some people, it is, I just want to go and find a person of color that like will understand. But other people might be like, okay, this is hard. What do I do? But also you can ask the white therapist, like, what is your training on this? Like, what have you worked with a lot of people of color before? What are your ways of distinguishing like your bias from the treatment or things like that? And that might make them feel more comfortable. Just to know that the person cares about the subject and is like, yeah, I stay up on my trainings. I did this one class, but I like made sure that I followed up afterwards because I know that BIPOC treatment and BIPOC trainings are always changing. So I'm like making space to make sure I can still always help you. So that for them would show them like, okay, yeah, this person cares about the issue. They care about me. And I might not have to educate them as much. And when I do, maybe it's a good reason why I'm educating them. So I feel like just even knowing for BIPOC clients that the white therapists out there are doing their due diligence to take care of like what they should do to stay culturally competent would help a lot of people be like, okay, maybe I can't find a person of color, but this person has a lot of training and most likely they're going to be able to receive me well. I think that would do wonders and help a lot of people so that they're not on all these waiting lists, just like waiting for a person of color to be ready.
Yes, because like you said, there's a high demand and a low supply. And in general, there's a low supply of therapists.
Yes.
But when you're looking at demographic, majority of therapists are white. We're seeing a trend in more females. We used to see it was primarily male. So we're seeing some changes. We're seeing more demographics coming into the space. But meanwhile, when it is so hard to access, it's so hard when people feel like there's no one for them. And I think that's so important to be able to ask the questions because your job is not to be worried if the therapist feels uncomfortable by you asking the questions. Your job is to make sure you feel comfortable in that space.
Exactly. And that's the only thing that really matters is if you feel comfortable, then that's the right person for you to go with. So it's just like trusting yourself and trusting the person that you're with. Because if you don't feel confident in the therapeutic relationship, then the work isn't going to be as like fruitful.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a big thing for me is also don't be afraid to call someone out. If you see that they are using like discriminatory language toward you, be like, you know what, I'm not comfortable. You're using this language and it's not appropriate. And you can choose to stop therapy with them, choose to have that conversation, whatever you feel. But
Yeah.
don't be afraid to say to them, this is making me uncomfortable because you deserve to be heard. Your voice deserves to be heard. And I would hope that a therapist would want to make that change and would want
Right.
to listen.
Right. And that's how you know if you have a good therapist. If they're like, oh, I had no idea. I didn't mean to be hurtful in that way. And I'll like definitely change how I do that going forward. That's a good therapist because it means that they are dedicated to the therapeutic process. They don't want any type of rupture that will hurt the therapeutic relationship. They want to stay connected to you. But if the therapist is like, why do I have to do that? Or like, why do I have to change for you? Why is it so important that I do this for you? Then maybe they're not a good therapist for you. So I would say that is a therapy red flag. Like, if you are not trying to meet me where I'm at, then I cannot meet you where you are at either. So you definitely want to feel comfortable with who you're with and trust them with your feelings.
Yes, absolutely, because how you feel in that therapeutic relationship sets the tone for the entire process. And
Yeah.
so many people, especially we've seen with the numbers within the Black community, they stop treatment so early and then they don't access more treatment in the future. And that's not fair. To have one bad experience and then to never feel like you can go back, because you deserve that support and you deserve to know that there's someone out there, hopefully someone out there for you that you will find, because you deserve the support that you need.
You deserve it. And I feel like BIPOC people, especially, like, we go through so much, we've been through so much, and historical trauma like still lives in our bodies. So even if we have not personally experienced it, our families have, and it's been given to us in some sort of way. So we are coming in therapy with so many heavy things, and we just deserve so much healing. Like, I think if anybody needs to be in therapy, it's BIPOC people, to have the healing from it, because I really feel like we deserve it. And to your point, I do agree that when sometimes people come in offices and they don't see what they need in the therapist, they're like, this, I knew it, I will never come back here again. Or because I think a lot of people have distrust in the mental health system as a whole, because thinking about what you said about how, like, most therapy theories and all of that were really made by white men. And so then when you think about it that way, it's like, okay, so I'm coming into this area where I'm being told that these things apply to me, but like white men made them. So like they already from the very beginning don't feel like it applies to them. And then when they see one thing that continues with that idea that therapy isn't for us, and it's like, I'm out. I shouldn't have been here in the first place. I'm going to go back to what I was doing. And that does impact their mental health. So some people don't know how delicate therapy sessions are, that you're really holding that person's life in your hands, and you have to be delicate with it, because if they leave and they never come back because of some little like faux pas you said that you thought was funny, like, you might have messed with their life permanently just because you weren't a good safe holding space.
Yes, there is so much responsibility on a therapist to be kind, to be empathetic, to be compassionate, to listen, to be non-judgmental, to be supportive. Last night I was in one of my classes and we were learning about bipolar disorder, and the teacher thought it would be funny to have students share their experiences with someone who they think might have been manic or hypomanic. And it turned into everyone laughing about what a manic episode might look like and how someone with bipolar disorder is quote unquote crazy. And I live with bipolar disorder, or bipolar 2 disorder. And I've never in my life been afraid to talk about my mental health. I talk about it all the time, love doing it. And last night I was so like unable to talk about it. I wanted to raise my hand and be like, this is not true. This is not what it looks like. But I was so ashamed by it. And it's something that I'm so comfortable talking about. So for people who are not comfortable talking about it, who maybe this is their first time accessing support, what you say and how you say it matters. It's not a joke.
It's stigmatizing. I'm so sorry that you had that experience. It's really messed up.
I'm so annoyed.
And I feel like there are a few disorders that the way that we talk about them in school is honestly kind of messed up. So like bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, the way we talk about people with eating disorders, substance issues, things like that. There is stigma even in the mental health system. Like, that was your teacher. And then the way that teachers and like other people share things, it's like you're teaching people to think these ways, and that is also harmful, because then they go out and they're working with people and they can make a joke of it. It's not funny at all. It's something serious, and there is not one way to be bipolar. There is not one way to be depressed, to be anxious, to have borderline personality disorder, to have an eating disorder. Nothing is cut and dry for anyone. And I just think that it's a shame that your teacher did that.
It is, and it's so frustrating that we see how many people need access to care. We see the statistics. We live in a time where the statistics are very prevalent. New research is constantly coming out every year. We're seeing the numbers, and yet the barriers to access treatment are so high. We know what stigmatizing language is, And yet so many people are ignorant or just don't care to make changes. I was with my younger cousin the other day and she was like, oh, they're cray cray. And I was like, you know, I was like, and it's like you know me and you know that I lecture you
Yeah.
about this, and yet you're still
Don't
going to
use the
continue to
word.
use this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just, especially within cultures where you grow up thinking that therapy makes you weak, where you're taught that you're going to impact your whole family by going to therapy, where you're taught that you should be praying, you shouldn't be going to therapy, where you're taught that you just have to be strong and being strong is not talking about it. When you finally go to get help, if that's your experience, it invalidates everything.
Yes. And then you internalize it, and then it's like, see, I knew something was wrong with me because this one
Yeah.
person treated me this way. And so it adds to the shame, and that's why people don't go to therapy.
Yeah.
It's
And
just really sad.
it's so sad because conversations like this exist. We can be having these conversations, we can be listening and choosing to educate ourselves. And for some reason, a lot of people don't. And hopefully we see that continue to change. I think my generation is really, really dedicated to having conversations. And I hope to see Gen Alpha continue that. And I hope to see it influence previous generations to be
Right.
part of the conversation, because conversation can change this and people deserve support.
I definitely think that these conversations are what helps people. Just to, like, I just wonder what it'll be like for people listening to this to be like, that one thing somebody said to me that was stigmatizing and that wasn't fair and I do deserve help. And I hope that whoever needs it gets to hear it that way. I just think
Yeah,
it's so unfair that we get pushed away from treatment before we ever get there.
absolutely. And it's so, if only people got to see the benefit of quality treatment with the therapist that's right for you, the modality that's right for you.
Right.
It can be so helpful. It can be life changing. It can give you a quality of life that you deserve when you didn't even know was possible, like you said before. It's so important that we remove this stigma, we start removing barriers to treatment, and we start encouraging and empowering people to make the choice that's right for them. And hopefully, one of the choices that they get to have is attending therapy. But now, switching gears to, a lot of people maybe can't access therapy, like we've said, or maybe people want to go to therapy, but their loved ones have this misconception or part of the stigma. And people want to set boundaries. They want to start setting boundaries to protect themselves. Let's switch gears into boundaries. So first, what is a boundary?
So a boundary is something that you put in place. And it's usually like as a result of somebody's action or behavior. It's not so that you're controlling the other person, but it's letting them know if you do this, this is what is going to happen for me next. So if you are to continue yelling at me, then I'm going to stop the conversation. So it's like, just so you know, you can act however you want to act, but when you act however you want to act, I'm going to respond this way. So it's a consequence that comes with somebody's behavior and kind of changes their access to you.
Yes, because people don't often treat other people with the respect they deserve, unfortunately. But when we set boundaries and we enforce those boundaries, we can teach people how to treat us with respect.
Exactly.
And when we respect other people's boundaries, we can then treat them with respect. So it goes both ways. And I know for me, a big thing was, well, if I set a boundary, then I am being selfish and I'm putting myself first, and that's wrong. But it's not, because the relationship you have with people should feel healthy. And when you constantly feel strained and drained by that relationship, it's not healthy for either one of you, and neither of you deserve that.
So it's like you said, you're teaching other people how to treat you. So it's like I'm learning how to treat you, you're learning how to treat me, and it's basically just like a guideline of how we want people to treat us so that they can understand us better. And then at some point, you might not have to, set those boundaries as often because the person gets to know you and they're like, okay, I know that they don't like when I do this, so I will refrain from doing that so that I can keep the relationship. And that's part of the goal of having boundaries. I think a lot of people think that it creates distance, but really I need this boundary so that we can maintain our friendship, our relationship. And when you think about it that way, it's not selfish at all. It's, I just need this so that we can be okay. And the concern is, I still want us to be okay, but I need this for me to be okay so that we can be okay.
Yes, because boundaries really influence not just the quality of our relationships, but the way we view ourselves as well. When we view ourselves as someone worthy of respect, that's a big change. And I know for me, an example of a boundary I've recently set, my dad hates this boundary, by the way, is if he has a bad day at work maybe and he calls me and he tries to take it out on me, typical parent behavior.
Yeah.
And he starts yelling, I'm going to start crying. And then he gets mad that I'm crying and he's like, you gotta stop acting like a baby. Okay. If I know that that's how the conversation's going to go and I'm only going to feel worse, I now tell him, if you continue yelling, I'm going to hang up. And he can choose to say, I'm sorry, I just actually need to vent about work. Do you mind listening to me? Or he can say, just keep yelling, and then I hang up the phone. And I thought for so long, I'm like, I'm being so disrespectful. I can't hang up. But I pay for my own phone bill, so I can hang up, number one. Number two, right? Number two, it's not healthy for me to sit there and start crying. Me crying makes him upset. So we're both making each other upset and we're butting heads, and it's unproductive when we both maybe just need a chance to, I need to cool off that just happened. He needs to cool off and get to a place where he wants to have a productive conversation, and then we can talk. So a boundary doesn't have to be, I'm never talking to this person again, but it can be, we need some space to cool off. Let's reconnect in 5 minutes or tomorrow or next week or whenever that time frame is appropriate for you.
Just like creating space for yourself to be like, I don't have to answer right now just because they want me to. It's valid that they have a want, but my want is also equally valid. So if I need space, that's what I'm going to do. So good for you for setting boundaries. Yeah, that's good.
Thanks. It's a good thing he doesn't listen to my podcast, otherwise he'd be so annoyed.
I was gonna say, and I know that my parents are probably gonna listen, so I'm gonna, keep some of my examples short. But I like what you said about the part that you said about, like, your dad has his own needs, you have your own needs, and you also have the availability to take space for yourself. Like, you pay your own phone bill. And I try to tell that to a lot of my clients, especially when they're having issues with their parents. Like, I'm like, please tell me, like, what's going to happen? Is something going to happen? Because if so, I want to be careful with how I'm helping you set this boundary. Is physical harm going to come to you? If physical harm is not going to come to you, you pay your own phone bill. Chances are you're probably going to be okay, and they're going to be fine when you call them again. And then when we sit with that together, like, you're probably right. I'm gonna try it out. But it's like, what you want to know from clients is, how has it gone in your family when you've set boundaries? What do boundaries look like in your family? What has it been like in your family when people have expressed anger? So you want to make sure it's safe before you have them set any kind of boundary. And then once you get past that and you're like, okay, you are safe, it's like, what kind of boundary would you feel okay setting? Maybe you take baby steps. So it's not the biggest boundary that you've ever set, but it's just like, in the morning, I need time for myself before we talk. I like to have my coffee first. So after that, we can have a conversation. And maybe just going from there. But I think a lot of people come from households where, especially in BIPOC communities, where you're supposed to be seen and not heard as a kid, or like, you're just not supposed to be in adult conversations. And sometimes for a lot of people, that continues even though they are adults. Like, their parents continue to think of them as like their little kid, and they're like, yeah, why are you talking to me this way? But they're not saying anything bad necessarily, but what they are doing is being assertive. And sometimes parents don't deal with that well, because for them that feels like talking back. And talking back is a big thing in BIPOC communities. Parents will find that disrespectful. And so a lot of clients will come in and say, like, I'm kind of scared to set a boundary because I don't know how it will go, because my parents would probably be upset that I say this. And you have to work through that with them. Like, yes, your parent might be upset, and them being upset likely isn't going to harm you. They probably need to know what it feels like to be upset by their growing adult child, because they're going to be disappointed because you're going to do what you want to do with your life. So let them practice being upset.
Exactly.
And they'll be fine. And you'll see that they'll be fine.
Yes, and people may not react well in the beginning to you setting boundaries because you've never done it before and they've never had to respect where you are at that point in time. And it doesn't mean that they don't love you, doesn't mean that they don't respect you. It's just that they don't know that maybe they're crossing a line. Maybe they want to tell you how to live your life. Maybe they want to give you advice on what to do, what not to do, and maybe what not to
Right.
do might be going to therapy. There may be all these different factors, maybe meddling a little bit in relationships. Parents love to do that. Or just people or friends or loved ones in general. So knowing that you're not wrong for setting the boundary if they don't react well, and that they have to learn too, because if you've never
Right.
set boundaries with them before, this is a brand new experience for them. They
Yeah.
may try to respect it and then accidentally cross that boundary, and it's okay for you to enforce it. You don't have to
Exactly.
say, you know what, let them cross the line, enforce it if you feel
Right.
comfortable and safe to do so, because your boundaries deserve to be respected. And sometimes people need a reminder.
Right. And so I think for a lot of clients are like, why do I have to keep reminding people this? And that can go for like their parents or anyone else. But it's like you said, they're adjusting to having a boundary set with them. They had no boundaries before with this person. And now all of a sudden they're telling them, yeah, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. If you do this, I'm going to take space. So that's hard for the person on the receiving end because it's like, you never did this before. But they're getting to know a new version of you. And so when they're getting to know the new version of you, they might need multiple times where you have to reinforce the boundary. And it's kind of like you almost have to treat them like a little kid. Like when your kid has the iPad and you're like, remember I told you if you don't do your homework, you don't get to have your iPad right now. And they're going to find a way to have their iPad 15 minutes later, but you're going to have to say, I'm going to take this because remember we talked about if you don't do this, you don't get to have your iPad until you finish your homework. So it's like you have to continuously remind them because people are going to go with their what is it? I want to say primitive, but like their normal nature of like getting their own needs met. And when they're trying to get their own needs met, sometimes they disregard other people's needs. And so they have to learn that they only get the iPad after they do the homework. And if they don't do the homework, they can't have the iPad. So, in order to continue the relationship with the person, they have to respect their boundaries. And if they're not respecting their boundaries, they're going to lose access to the person that they love, or they're going to lose access in a certain way. They might not, and that might not feel good for them. So, if they're wanting to continue the relationship, they also have to be respectful of the person's boundaries because now this person is new and they're reinforcing boundaries. So you have to like respect what that person is telling you, and it can be hard on the receiving end to be given all these new boundaries. It can be overwhelming, and it's just creating space for you to know this person might be a little bit upset, and I will sit with them until they can understand it. I will continuously tell them. Um, but after a certain point, yeah, you're definitely going to want to set firmer boundaries if they're not listening to you.
Yeah, and it's okay to set firmer boundaries. Again, really validating the fact that just because someone doesn't understand, they don't want to understand, they're
Right.
ignoring you, they're actively choosing to disregard your boundaries, maybe they aren't really learning and adapting to it. It's okay to set firmer boundaries. It's okay to have a conversation. It's okay to eventually get to the point where you're like, I'm tired of having the same conversation.
Right.
Something needs to change. All of it is okay, all of it is valid. And I think so many people try to set boundaries. People keep crossing it and they're like, you know what? I don't know why I have boundaries. There's no reason to have boundaries because no
Yeah.
one's listening to me.
Right.
But you deserve to have boundaries that protect you and your mental well being.
Right. And I think people, I've heard that before, like nobody's listening to me. And so I'll ask people, okay, like, after you say what your boundary is, are you enforcing it? Or is it just that you keep having the same conversation? And some people will say, like, oh, I just said it. And I'm like, okay, well, you said it, but did you do something after they continue to cross the boundary? And they'll say no. And so kind of for the other person might feel like a suggestion, and you don't want it to feel like a suggestion. This is what you're saying. Your foot is down. You decided on it, and they have to respect that. And if they don't respect that, they should see what the consequence is like. And maybe once they see the consequence a few times, they will either adjust and realize that they have to give you what you're wanting and needing, or they will make their own space, and then you'll realize that maybe this wasn't a safe relationship for me to have because I'm not allowed to have boundaries with this person.
Yes, that is such a huge point. Is you should feel safe in the relationship. You should feel like you have a voice. You have a voice for a reason. You deserve to use your voice. You deserve to express yourself in whatever manner is appropriate for you, as long as it's safe for other people.
Exactly.
Keep that out there.
No violence.
No violence.
That's it.
But it's important that you get to express yourself and that you feel heard. That you feel heard when you express yourself. And if you don't, and if you're setting and continuously trying to enforce boundaries and it's not working, you deserve to make a decision that's right for you. And whether it's firmer boundaries, whether it's altering the relationship, that's up to you. But you deserve to feel like you have a voice and like you're heard in every relationship that you have.
Right. And I think that that's even a conversation that people can have in therapy. Like, I want to set boundaries. I don't even know what they sound like. What am I supposed to say? Sometimes my clients hate this, but I will ask them to, like, let's role play. Like, I'll be the person that you're trying to give the boundaries to, and I'm going to shoo them away every chance I get, and you have to keep enforcing them. And sometimes for people that makes it easier because they've already practiced what they want it to sound like. And for a lot of people, they get like emotionally overwhelmed when they're trying to set that boundary, and they'll say, I just end up starting to cry, or I get angry, and then the boundary wasn't set. But when you practice, like with your therapist, you kind of get the words out, you know what you want them to sound like, and you can shut it down before it gets to a place where you don't feel able to set the boundary. It's just kind of like practice makes perfect. Once I say it, it'll feel okay.
Yes. And okay. So as a client, I hate the
Yeah.
role play because I feel so
Hate
awkward.
it too.
Right? I feel so awkward. I'm like, I don't want to practice because I don't know yet.
Yeah.
But it is so valuable because you get the chance to kind of get through those emotions that are going to come up and
Right.
understand so you can get through a conversation without crying. I'm a big crier. Role play helps me get to a point where I can say what I need to say without crying, because once I start crying, no one listens to me anymore. They're like, go away. So
It's over for me once I start crying. There's no more conversation.
yeah, it's just me on the floor crying. And it's so important that we have that space to practice. But I really want to go back to the BIPOC community because we talked about how within the culture, within the family and community, there might be a lot of pushback on accessing therapy, on accessing treatment. So what are some examples of boundaries someone can set with their loved ones, with their family, within their community, so that they can go and access treatment without maybe feeling shamed or guilty for it?
So I think it's important to know, like, where they come from in their family, and like how have people in your family had therapy. What were the reactions in your family unit when that person had therapy? Because that can help figure out for them, like, are there any biases for them coming into it, but also prepare them to know that, like, if you do share this, then maybe there are some people who are going to have some things to say. Um, so I've had a few clients that will just say, like, either my parents don't know that I'm in therapy because I don't want to share it with them, or they'll say my parents know I'm in therapy, but they don't know what I talk about in therapy. Or my parents try to ask me what we talk about in therapy, and I tell them that I don't want to talk about it with them. So it can be as simple as that. Like, I either don't want to share it with you, or I will share certain aspects of it with you. But I think it's totally up to the person what they share about their therapy sessions with their family.
Absolutely. I know my parents are always like, what did you say about me in therapy? Like, are you complaining about me the whole time? I'm like, maybe, sometimes, a little bit. But
yeah, I like to play with my parents. I'm like, yeah, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, and I maybe talked about you bad.
But you don't have to go into details with your loved ones. That's why therapy, it has confidentiality, therapist client confidentiality, because you don't have to tell other people. It's between you and your therapist and the relationship you guys have created together. It is not about all the third parties. And it's so important to recognize that you're allowed to say, I don't really want to talk about it. I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for supporting them going to therapy and feeling curious about my process. However, at this time, I really just don't want to talk about it. I want to continue working with my therapist, and maybe we can have a conversation later on. Or don't even include the maybe we can have a conversation later on, because you don't have
Especially if you don't want to.
Yeah.
So I agree with all those things and what you said about confidentiality too, to know that just because I'm writing about our sessions and our notes doesn't mean that anybody
Mm.
can have access to them. Like especially if you're over 18, your parents don't automatically get your your therapy notes. I would have to get your written consent in order to tell them anything. So I think a lot of people feel nervous about like what therapists can write in notes, especially if it can get back to people. So I find it very important to share what confidentiality is and how it like where what it applies to. So your parents can't have any access to what we're talking about. The only way that they would know is if you told them. If your parent calls me and says that they want to know about your treatment, I'll say I don't even know who that person is. I can't even tell you if that person is getting services here because that's how far confidentiality goes. So you're definitely safe in therapy and whatever you want to share with your parents and your family can, but there is no need to if you don't want to. And anything that they get would never be from me.
Yes, and on that note, in my ethics and law class last week, I learned that so if a parent was to call up and say, I'm really concerned about my daughter, she is exhibiting this behavior, the therapist is not going to talk about it with them, but instead call you, right? So you can call and say, this concern was brought up to me.
Right.
Can we talk about it and consult with you? So they're not going to sit there and talk with your parent about a concern that your parent brought up. They will call you. I had no idea
Exactly.
that that was a thing. Always thought like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, if my dad called, like he'd find out everything. No, thank you to ethics and law.
Oh yeah, and I also took that class too. So good. I'm glad that you're taking those courses because it's definitely important to know like the law of it and like the ethics portion of it. Um, but yeah, even when I worked at a college counseling place, we still, even if your parents called, I still wouldn't even be able to say this. I can't even tell you if this person gets treatment here. I'll take down your note, and if we have somebody here that applies to, then I'll check in with them. But I can't even tell you if that person comes here. So you can't call back because I don't have anything to say to you.
And that's the thing. When you go to therapy, when you finally seek the treatment that you deserve, it is between you and the therapist. You can set boundaries with everyone in your life and let them know that you don't want to talk about it. You don't have to tell people you're going to therapy. You can tell people you're going to therapy, but all those decisions are up to you. And you are in control.
Yes.
And that is so powerful. You're in control of the fact that you're getting support. You're in control of whether or not you want to continue with that therapist. If you're
Right.
comfortable, uncomfortable, you get to make all of these decisions. No one
Yeah.
can take those decisions away from you.
It's from an empowerment standpoint, and that's like what we preach in therapy. Like I want to empower you to know, like, look at all the things you're doing here. You brought yourself here. You are the writer of your own story. I trust your opinion just as much as I trust mine. And you're the person who's telling me how your life is. So you're the authority on your life. I can never
Yeah.
say that I'm right or wrong. It is yours. So you have the most power here. And I think that that's a power dynamics, that's a whole other conversation that we could have. But like there is the idea that the therapist is empowering the room, and I don't like that idea. I like that we both have shared power and we both share energy, and the other person is the authority on their story. And I think
Yes.
that's important for people to believe in order for them to even want to come to therapy, because sometimes people will think, oh, the therapist is just going to tell me what's wrong with my life. I'm not doing that. If you like it, I love it, but I will tell you what I feel is unhealthy for you.
Yes. And therapists will guide you to find the answers for yourself. They're not going to
Exactly.
start attacking you and blaming you. They're there to support you, and you deserve to feel supported. That's what it comes down to. You deserve to feel
Yeah.
supported, and that support's going to look different for everybody. But you deserve to feel supported, feel comfortable, and get any help that you need. As we're wrapping up, I really enjoyed our conversation because not only does it help empower people to take control of their
Yeah.
treatment, but you're giving people so many tangible takeaways. And on that note, what are some affirmations that people can tell themselves?
Yeah. So I think it's so important for BIPOC people to like empower themselves in so many ways. And so I wrote a few affirmations. The first one is, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Maybe before, when, our ancestors were growing up and all the trauma they grew up in, they didn't imagine what it would be like to be in somebody's office to just share their feelings. So that is their wildest dream, that we get a chance to do that. So we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. The second one I put is I'm entitled to my boundaries. The third one, I deserve peace. I think everyone deserves peace. The fourth one is someone's lack of acceptance of my boundaries has no reflection on myself as a person. So just because that person doesn't understand where I'm coming from, that has nothing to do with me. That is their own stuff. But my stuff over here, we're going to set my boundary, and that is for them to think about. And the last one that I put is I free myself from narratives that no longer serve me. So we might have grown up with these narratives that, yeah, therapy isn't for me. Thinking about my emotions is not for me. And those are things that don't serve us anymore. We don't have to continue to subscribe to those things. You can create the narrative because you are the author of your own story. And I think that those are important things for people to remember as they think about therapy and as they think about healing.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.